it's Travis from Kruger, back once again. Welcome to segment 5 of Creating the DESA. Your host has returned, and yeah, I'm crouching down on my hands and knees about to start work. And if you sat through the last couple of hours of this documentary, my hat's off to you. I know I go on yarns. I know that I can go on tangents, but believe me when I tell you that, you know, if you fast forwarded through any of that stuff, you might have missed something. It's very important to me. It's very important to the process. As far as I'm concerned, of, you know, the time that I spent over almost 25 years now of building these. So, if you've sat through all the, you know, last portion of the segments, and we've covered the history, we've covered the scale, this is the one you really want to sit through. This is where I'm going to give you a lot of the information as we actually begin the building process of taking the DESA Becker clone and transforming it into 2 finished copies of a Part 1 and a Part 2 razor glove. And this is where you're going to actually find out some of my secrets. I'm going to give you some of my big secrets in this one. So please do watch. And yeah, here we go. I'm going to sit down and talk a little bit about what we're going to be seeing in the next portion of this documentary, being segment 5. So thanks for your attention. Thanks for joining me once again. And here we go. So what have we learned so far? Well, we've learned so far that Travis likes to talk a lot. And, you know, my apologies, but it's who I am, so sue me. But we've also learned a few things about the glove, and that is it's an ongoing process. It's one that never ends. And, you know, for those of you with sharp eyes, you might have caught a couple things that you might have thought, I didn't get that, you know, all that kind of stuff, and that's fine. I do too. And, you know, things that I'll stop in the middle of the recording and I'll start going off on what I don't like and that. And that's just my obsessive nature. But, you know, sharp eyes will pick things up, you know, little details here and there. I'm sure some of you noticed that this rivet tends to ride left to right on the back plate in some shots, and that's just because I got a little bit overzealous with the drilling, and you know, these are things that I don't mention until I kind of take a breath and really think about it to bring to bear. So, you know, when it comes up I mention it, when it doesn't, I don't. So here's the DESA Becker clone, which has become a staple of my existence as I go through this process and wind down my orders and try to give back to the community a little bit. Let's talk about what we're going to be dealing with. Obviously, we're going to be dealing with the basic construction of this beast. And in that process, I'm going to show you a good majority of what I go through to bring this to fruition. And in the end, you know, I won't be able to tell you why I obsess over it. I'm sure any of you guys out there, any of you glove guys watching this, would probably say the same thing we just do. It's all about, you know, it's all about the build, I guess. I mean, we come back to it, we build one, we build another. Who knows? Anyway, all right, so here we go. Here's the Becker clone. And again, you know, it's funny. I look at this stuff on video and I realize, God, my hand is so big to fit into this thing. And you know, even that bugs me. I mean, I almost wish I had a different hand when I built it. I almost wish I had Charles Bellardinelli's hand, you know, the guy who did the majority of the glove, you know, scenes in the opening sequence of the first film, because his hand was the right size. So you know, not only do I have to take that into account when I'm building it, but when I'm wearing it too, because I can really mangle the metal if I squeeze my hand into it. So I always handle it very, very delicately. And you know, that having been said, it's just a side note. Let's talk about the build process. I'm going to show you from the beginning. You know, you saw me tracing off some templates a little bit earlier in this documentary, and I'm not going to show the. I may show 1 or 2 little shots of me, you know, actually cutting it with the shears, but that's pretty basic knowledge. You know, cut, be careful, wash and repeat. What I am going to show you, though, is a very big trade secret. And some of the guys out there who build these may have a problem with this. Some might not. I don't know. Again, this is my hobby too. So I'm going to share this with you. And while I'm not going to give you everything under the sun, I'm going to give you the most important things if you're starting to build gloves, if you're frustrated, or if you're just interested in my methods. I'm going to give that to you. But along the way, I'm going to give you some really well held to the chest secrets that I've kept for many, many years. And let's talk about secret number one. You know, the color on this thing, and when I say this thing, I mean all gloves in general, changes obviously throughout each film, sometimes between different gloves in the film. There's different hero gloves for the subsequent sequels. There are two main colors we're dealing with for the part one and the part two. The part one is actually a little closer to this. This is the extreme. This has been just cooked to hell. But it does have some telltale aspects to it that are applicable to the finish on the part one. Some of the scorching effects, which are not, in some cases are scorching, which in some cases are not scorching and just meant to look like scorches. The part one is a little bit more wear and tear in some shots. The part two is a much cleaner version, and I've talked about this in lots of my other videos. But they both have the same thing in common. They both start with a base, what I call caramel. It's the best way I can describe the color. And I'm going to show you how to get that color. And not just the color, I'm going to show you how to get the sheen off the metal to get that color to be perfectly matte. Now, when I say perfectly matte, the glove does have a sheen, even the part two. In some periodicals of the time, even in some of the shots in the bus driving sequence, you can see it. It really has a good sheen to it. And that comes from a lot of handling and really, frankly, just oils of the hands getting on the metal. In other shots, it's very matted out. Depends on the lighting, depends on all the things I've already talked about. So, you know, you already know that. You're well-versed in Travis's methods of lighting so far. God knows I spent enough time on it. But what we're really talking about here, and I'm going to show you my pre-DESA Becker template, so it's been altered. I can show it to you. This is my original DESA pinky template. The real topic that I'm trying to get to the point on here is how do we get from this shiny piece of manufactured copper to this matte finish caramel base color. And again, my camera is not the best. We all know that by now. The color is not accurate as to real life, but it's pretty close. It's enough to demonstrate anyway. How do we get this finish? I'm going to show you the trick that I use. And it's a trick that, frankly, I didn't learn until about maybe 2 years ago, and it was quite by accident. So I went through all those years building these. I used metal dye, I used fabric dye, I used ammonia, I used flux, heated flux, blow torches, anything plus the kitchen sink to try. There's gloves out there I did years ago that I was putting like varnish on. Anything that I could possibly think of to get that color, I was trying. And it was absolutely insanity-inducing. It made me nuts. I used to send letters out, these long, you think I talk much, I used to send out these long letters, don't touch the glove, don't muck with the finish, it'll chip, don't look at the glove, don't, all this stuff, just to make sure it lasted as long as it possibly could, because I cared so much about, delivering something that was as close to screen as possible. And God love my clients, because let me tell you, they went through it all with me. And now that I've got it to this point, to where I have complete control over the finish, from what I can tell is the authentic method. Look, man, all this stuff that I'm talking about, I could be totally wrong. I'm the first one to admit it. I don't claim authority on anything. All I know is I've been building these things for a quarter of a goddamn century. And, that lends a bit of street cred to, stuff that I think I bring to the table as one of the many glove masters out there, who I respect So, when I talk about, and yeah, I broke out the wrist cozy, I did find it. One of these days I'll actually get a sweater to replace the screen sweater that I had from Dream Child, Part 5. You know, as I talk about all this stuff, all these details, and try to keep you interested, you know, this is as much for me as it is for you guys. You know, I'm winding things down. This is kind of my swan song, you know, my ninth symphony. And, you know, I want to share this information with you. I want to kind of pass on the torch to, you know, and with really without ego. Because I get so much, or as much, you know, hate mail as I get, and I do get my fair share, I get a lot of fan mail. And, you know, guys really into this hobby, and I was and am and always will be one of you. I get it. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you, as I wind things down, because nothing's riding on it. I'm not selling these things. I've got nothing to lose. I'm also going to try and respect the other glove masters, because, again, I'm not the only custodian of this hobby. And while I may inadvertently let loose a few of their secrets, because, as I said in part of the last segment of this, you know, documentary, at some level we're all doing the same stuff, I have to be careful not to give away everything if I know certain things that they're doing. It's just not right. But I'm going to give you mine, and at least a fair portion of them. So, that having been said, I know this is getting long, and I hope that's okay with everybody. You know? I really do. Because really it's, to quote a famous phrase, it's all for the love of the glove. Isn't it? And that's what we're all here for. So let's keep that in perspective. I know I certainly am, as I take you through the process of building one of these beasties and really put a final capper on this long journey that I've been on, and that a lot of you have been on with me. So, first order of business is I'm going to show you some cut templates, and we're going to get to the color procedure and the matte procedure of how to get this base caramel here that I keep referring to. And once we do that, I'm going to get into shaping the first segment of the glove that I always start with, the knuckles. And we just go down the row, and the degree of difficulty and all their small telltale little details and idiosyncrasies and aspects will be made crystal clear, hopefully. I'm going to give you just about everything that I do. I hope it makes your day. I hope you have a good time with it. And we'll be seeing this in a different form by the end. Actually, two different forms. One, two. Thanks for your attention. The intros, while long, hopefully they've been entertaining, and I feel important to the documentary of creating a DESA on the whole. And at the end of it, I'll definitely be giving you know, a tip of the hat to all the other guys out there. I want to include as many in this as have become so important to my life as a glove guy, and paying my respects to them as well. And in case you want to get a glove, you'll know where to go. But I kind of do that, you know, as a rule anyway. And without further ado, let's continue creating the DESA with our host, Travis Cowsill, saying, whatever you do, don't fall asleep, because it could be me that comes to get you, and nobody wants that. Indeed, nobody wants that. Although I don't think it's because I'm scary. I think it's because I would probably annoy you to death with my long ramblings late into the night. So here we go. Segment 5. And for those of you who've been listening to all of this, I've been fighting a lot of illness for the past actually few months. I was in the hospital a few months ago for some pretty serious shit. I'm still kind of recovering, so my voice is still at this point in and out. And again, without further ado, we're going to get right into this. This entire portion of the creating the DESA documentary is going to be devoted, segment 5 is going to be devoted entirely to one procedure and one trade secret, and that is the color. The color of the copper. And we'll be dealing with the backplate, which is a whole different animal, later in the documentary. And you can see I've got my little setup here just for visual enjoyment, kind of a part 1 application on that index tip. That's one of my practice tips. You can see the blade is very shiny. And if you've noticed, I did mar and weather and age up the blades on the Becker. I didn't go totally nuts. They're really mangled in the NSA documentary. I didn't want to go quite that far, but they are the same blades. They've just been really mucked up, and we'll talk about that process later in other portions and segments of this documentary. So, here we go. I'm going to give you one of my most valued secrets, and if this doesn't tell you that I'm in it for the hobby, then I don't think anything else will. I promised I wouldn't do a whole bunch of shots of me cutting, but it's a nice little segue in, so here we go. I'm actually cutting out a pre-Becker clone index knuckle. It's not none of the templates that you're seeing on the floor are my final templates, so I'm very comfortable showing them, although there's some close aspects of them, so they may give you some use, they may not. But for the purposes of what we're doing right now, which is cutting a little bit of metal, I think it will be fine to let these things lie around and you have a look. So as I cut this out, I'm also going to let you know that this is not even a real template cut procedure. I'm doing a very crude, quick cutout for the purposes of this color segment for you guys. To divulge this little secret. So this is going to be a very quick and dirty faux template cut. I invariably use, I have to replace my test pieces as I work over the months and years anyway. This is not a waste of time for me. I will keep this and use it for my reference going forward. But let's pretend for a second that it's not just a cheap knockoff of my pre-Becker clone DESA template for part 1, and let's pretend this is actually how I do it, because this is actually how I do it, and I'm knee-deep in metal doing this right now. And let's just pretend you're privy to it. So I mentioned earlier the mallet being your workhorse tool, and here's why. Yep, I drill into the mallet. And you can see the drill sliding around. There are little tricks and nuances to the way I do things that are not really advantageous in terms of time and accuracy and everything else, but those sacrifices are made to get other things that otherwise I couldn't get. Keeping the drill head soft and supple gives me a longer drill spread, time-wise, to get through the hole, and gives me more control over staying within the boundaries of the ink marks. I know that sounds a little weird, but it's true. That's why you see me easing into it. My drill holes are pretty accurate, and they need to be, because you'll see once I do them, I'm kind of thinking 3 steps ahead, and I know I'm going to have to bore them out a little bit to give myself, the max mobility I can with the rivets, and they really need to have a very solid starting point. So, unfortunately, the more time you take to do these things, the better they are. Sure, that seemed very quick, but really when you're drilling, that wasn't. That was a pretty slow process. First thing I'm going to do is take my sanding stone, and you can see it's really been, I've used this a lot for this purpose. And I have a lot of different sanding stones. This is a fairly new one. I generally try to start and get a good feel going for where the piece, how much sanding it needs, and if there's a lot of toothing on the sides from the cuts, I'll use the big one. But if it's just moderate, I'll switch over to the smaller one, which has really been worn down and is a little finer grain, which is what I just did.
So I just decided that I didn't need the big coarse one, and I'm going to switch over to my my smaller, really, really worn down piece of sanding stone. Now, the nice thing about copper, if you've never worked with it or if you are working with it and you know this, but even if you are working with this, you may not be aware just how forgiving it can be. Copper is one of the most forgiving, if not the most forgiving metals I've ever worked with. I've worked with steel, I've worked with brass, obviously, and a few other alloys, but copper is very forgiving. If you make a mistake, you can almost eradicate it, depending on the severity of that mistake. In terms of dents, in terms of nick marks, all that kind of stuff. And on the flip side, if you're not careful, you can really screw it up by overworking a section, With my magic tool, I'm always very cautious of that. There's kind of a threshold that you have to get to learn with copper, to where if you tweak a piece of it one too many times, you're really messing with the structure of the alloy, and it'll go gooey. It actually physically will go gooey on you. And you want to keep that brittle, that almost rigid substructure intact. So the less work you have to do on it, the better the piece is going to look. And I always keep that in mind. So here we go. This is it. I'm giving you my color. I'm giving you a couple of stages of the color. My color goes through, depending on the glove, but let's talk about the part 1 and the part 2 now. I generally go through about 3 to 4 color stages, depending, and then even more weathering on top of that, and special effects weathering, and the reds for the tips, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not going to give you all of it, but I'm going to give you the base color that is indicative of all the gloves, really. It's that perfectly patinaed tan caramel, and this is how I do it. And cleanliness of the metal is paramount to the process. So this is stage 1, and this is basically what this does is it strips any patina that's occurred. Even on this machined copper, you've got a bit of patina because it oxidizes. Copper and non-ferrous alloys will oxidize just with contact, and very quickly, with the atmosphere, with oxygen. And you can see it's really important to get every single nook and cranny and really take your time to clean this metal. And I'm cleaning it, obviously, with the industrial workhorse solder flux that I have, the liquid flux. It's acid. So it is dissolving any surface patining, any surface dirt, weathering, any of that. And on a very, very fine level, what it's also doing is it is evening out the surface of metal. Maybe not totally visibly, but it's important. This comes into play. So we're eating away a very thin layer of the molecules of the copper to get going. And what we want is a perfectly clean surface. Now, I know you're looking at the little eye there that I drew and going, well, you're not cleaning that. And you're right. That's okay. That will be removed in a second with the second stage of this. And you'll need a little bit of water at this point. We're going now into this whole first stage of cleaning it is just one stage. The trick stage I'm going to show you is stage 2. Stage 3, where we bring more colors, hues, and start really controlling the depth of the color and some of the surface weathering, is the next stage. And I'm going to have to draw a line at some point somewhere. I don't know when I'm going to stop, but we'll figure that out as we go here. Because I can't give away everything, because then I start, trailing into other people's methods, and that's not cool. But this is a method that I learned on my own. Nobody told me, so here it is for demonstration. So the water is 5% H2O and 5% vinegar. That was the dip that you just saw me cleaning the residue of the flux off of. Very important. And here we go. This now is the second portion of this first stage of metal prepping for the color. Very, very fine grit sandpaper. Not totally fine, but pretty fine. I don't know the actual, I've never been one to know the actual grit levels for these things. I go and I if I feel it and it feels smooth but still like sandpaper, that's how I gauge it. And we're going to sand the metal. Now, this is going to create probably like a freak out moment in your head if you're actually doing this along with me on the video. I would imagine somebody's going to. because that's what I would do being a geek. Because what's going to happen is I'm going to show you the effect you're going to get, and you're going to go, oh my god, I ruined the metal. It's just relax. It's going to be fine. We're going to sand both sides. We're going to start with the bottom, and very, very rough. By the way, I have a phobia with sandpaper. You know how people sometimes can't look at spiders, or like a serious phobia. I'm not wearing gloves because of it, but it does make it easier. I can't stand sandpaper. It freaks me out. It always has. I hate working with it. I hate touching it. I hate looking at it, but I have to use it. So very, very vigorous sanding. The angle and stroke does not matter. This is giving me chills looking at this. I hate this. I mean, I'm not kidding, guys. I really do have a phobia about it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to look at it. Just sand it. Sand the fucking piece. Now look, you can see the actual copper powder forming from the piece that we've just bored off here, and this is important. Once you've got that half, always want to start with a clean half. We're going for maximum effect here, so switch your sandpaper over to the clean half. Again, start sanding, sanding, sanding. Really get as much coverage as you can and as even as you can, especially on the bottom. This is very, very important. And if you're finding that the edges are not picking up the scrape, then file down the edges of the copper so you can really get into those grooves. Now, finding another clean piece on your sandpaper, and this powder is going to come into play in just a second. You're going to need it. Same thing, very abrasive scrubbing. Scrub the metal as hard and fast as you can. You want to totally get everything off, and you want those scrapes. It doesn't matter if it's uniform at this point, but you want to get full surface coverage, because if you don't, you're going to have problems. And I'm actually going to show you a deliberate error. I'm going to make a mistake for purposes of demonstration here of what you don't want to do, and to show you how picky this metal is when you're trying to get an even surface color. You really have to treat it gingerly, and you really have to do these steps if you want to get it even, as far as I'm concerned. Otherwise, you'll have the mistake that I'm going to show you in just a few minutes, or actually just about a minute. All right, so I'm wearing gloves for a very specific reason. You really can't get anything on the metal during this process, and I'm going to be wearing gloves after this for the totality of the glove build.